hello, welcome to the fourth installment of Better Buildings for Everyone, a webinar series by the Institute for Market Transformation. My name is Alexis Holguin Juarez, and again, today's topic will be climate justice through equitable policymaking for the built environment. So let me introduce my co-facilitators. So we have Ms. Precious Wright, who is our Director for Community Engagement. We have Juliana Di Laro, who is our Associate Director. And again, myself, Alexis Holguin Juarez, I'm the Senior Associate for Community Engagement. So now we're gonna open it up to y'all to see who is in this virtual space. So a poll should be popping up asking, what industry do you currently work in? And we're going to have that poll open for about 30 seconds or so. And while people are answering this poll, hello, Emily. Hello, Kelly from New York City. Okay, there we go. And here are the poll results. So it looks like we have a mix of individuals in this virtual space, a lot of nonprofit, a lot of local and federal government. Well, hello, welcome to everyone. And now, just in case for those of y'all that did not hear in the beginning, feel free to put your name, pronouns, location, and organization into the chat. And while y'all do that, I'm gonna pause to let y'all know that throughout this presentation, feel free to put any comments and talk to each other in the chat. But if you have any questions, there is a specific button on the bottom panel that says Q&A. Make sure to put any of your questions in that button so that we don't lose anything in the chat, but also so that we can answer your questions at the end and they're all in one location. And I see more individuals introducing themselves. Hello, Sophia from New Orleans. Hello, Julie. Yes, hello, everyone. Hello, Bill from Indiana. Hello, Lauren. Okay, yes, keep on putting your introductions in the chat. And again, this is a place to connect to individuals in this virtual space, so feel free to talk to each other and try to connect. So going through our agenda, we're going to talk first about our organization, IMT, or Institute for Market Transformation. And we're going to talk about how our organization had a moment for change and what that change was towards equitable policy making. And then we're going to go through what was our process to figure out how to go towards that change, our process for developing our solution, which is the community engagement framework that we operate under. And then we're going to talk about our framework's outcomes and how we're implementing that framework. And at the end, we will open it up for Q&A. And before we get into the content, we're going to go through a quick land acknowledgement. So for those of y'all that are not familiar, a land acknowledgement is an effort to recognize the Indigenous past, present, and future of a particular location to understand our own place within that relationship, as so eloquently stated by the Native Governance Center. So we don't have a specific land acknowledgement written down because all of us come from very different locations, as y'all can see introducing yourself in the chat. But I'll just show an example of what a verbal land acknowledgement would look like for my location in Southern Michigan. So I'm from Southern Michigan. I'm from the lands of the Kickapoo, Miami, and Peoria tribes, and I owe my ability to live in this area and enjoy the lands, waters, and ecosystems to those tribes' past, present, and future stewardship of those lands, waters, and ecosystems. And if you have any curiosity of how to do a land acknowledgement or any resources as far as what is a land acknowledgement, in the chat, we just dropped the Native Governance Center's link. So now let's talk about, who is IMT? Again, IMT stands for the Institute for Market Transformation. We are a national nonprofit with a mission to catalyze widespread and sustained demand for high-performing buildings. And we have that mission because we have a vision for our future world where buildings dramatically lower greenhouse gas emissions and support our physical, social, and economic well-being. And now I'm going to pass it over to Precious to talk about IMT's historic moment for change.
Thank you, Alexis, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Precious Rideout, Director of Community Engagement at IMT. I am so excited that you all decided to join us late October, late in the afternoon on this Thursday, or excuse me, September. I'm already in October. Late in the year, late in the day, just to learn a little bit more about our journey. And so I'm just delighted that you all wanted to join us and learn a little bit more. Just a plug to use those reactions in your chat box or the reactions here on Zoom. We love a lot of interaction, whether you agree with something or you thought something was cool or you're kind of questioning how something came about. We love to kind of see those reactions and engage as much as possible. I know there's a lot of you all that have joined us, so we're unable to unmute everyone, but we'd love to see some of that energy and collaboration and just feedback through the chat and through reactions. So I will begin just talking a little bit about our journey and kind of setting the context for how the community engagement framework and its resources were formed, and happy to pass it to my teammates later down the road. So many of you may know or be familiar with IMT. We were founded in 1996. IMT stands on the belief that buildings have a part to play in climate change, and better buildings can actually improve people's lives by reducing pollution and protecting health, possibly even creating economic opportunity and supporting climate resilient communities. So for more than 25 years, IMT has built an amazing and impressive reputation for its expertise in building infrastructure, policy design, and thought leadership. From 96 to about 2019, we've worked hand in hand with policymakers, many of whom may be on this presentation now, to create and deploy building-focused legislation and codes that create a momentum for greater change and building efficiency and performance. We've specialized in policy approaches that raise performance expectations and reflect the needs of industry stakeholders, supporting inclusive economic opportunity and increase resiliency and health. And this is our work and more, not to toot our own horn, but I will toot it because we put the work in. It's well due and deserved for IMT for this long being in the game, giving these solutions, policy approaches, and various performance expectations out into our field. In 2019 to 2020, when we identified a need for change, we've actually been working toward this since about 2015. IMT has taken steps to shift from energy efficiency work to equitable decarbonization at the end of our timeline here, but I'll take you on a little journey. Most notably in 2019 and throughout 2020, in the midst of a global pandemic, right? And regular, visible, anti-Black and racially motivated injustices were center stage in the world and continue to be. IMT's leadership team and board of directors committed to spending time and resources on diversity, equity, and inclusion processes and supporting guiding principles to kind of hold the organization accountable and staff accountable to our commitments. We also hired a DEI firm to strengthen the equity impact of the organization's work. And all of this is because too often frontline communities, and when I say frontline communities, I'm talking about those communities that experience the most immediate and worst impacts of climate change, and are most often communities of color, Indigenous, and low-income individuals. So too often these communities, these frontline communities, are excluded from critical decisions, policies, and technical processes implemented by local officials without their knowledge, without their consent, or even their expertise, even being in the room let alone at the table when these decisions that directly impact their communities go down. So in 2021, a former staff member, Ryan Freed and Esme Heek, a Ray Fellow, were two superstar catalysts for change here because they began thinking deeply about the work we're actually doing and how it impacts communities on the front lines. We began a long work of building a framework for engaging communities. We identified several community-based organizations for collaboration, refined their feedback, and we were able to actually test and implement those principles in Orlando, Florida, which we'll hear about soon from Juliana. And today we're focusing more broadly on equitable decarbonization, which maintains our technical expertise as leaders in this work, but also being intentional about how that expertise is leveraged among various stakeholders, including frontline community stakeholders and leaders as well. So I will advance my own slide. Let me try that. It worked. Now I'm going to talk about the process of developing a community engagement framework. And to start with that, why even create a framework? You know, I just kind of ran down IMT's legacy over the past 25 plus years in our work. So why even create something like this? And simply put, you know, we created the framework to make an intentional shift from business as usual toward a just transition. I hope you've had the opportunity at some point to check out our framework and our resources on our website. It outlines, or it stems from, three major goals that we want to achieve through this framework over the next few years. The first goal is transformation. The second goal of balance, and the third, closing gaps. And this transform goal is really to make the policymaking process more accessible to communities at the national organization level and transform the slow violence that can be inherent in an overly technical process. Essentially, this means that we don't want to go into a community parachuting policy, right? Dropping in and then leaving, but become partners with and engage community early on in the process and follow the lead of community and or community-based organizations and the co-development of the process. And I'll just say a quick word. We'll hear a little bit more about how this came to be. Juliana will share, but that term, first glance, it can seem like an over-exaggeration or an inaccurate description to kind of categorize a process as being violent, particularly a technical process. But when, like I said, decision-making around climate issues can be technical and outright inaccessible to marginalized groups, it can result in adverse health effects and even the loss of life, depending on a building's health, depending on the location of a particular community in proximity to certain buildings and building materials. So there's a lot there, but we wanted to acknowledge the path that takes, kind of follow the thread all the way through to how it affects communities. And balancing, we want to balance uneven power dynamics in our energy-related policy work by leveraging and redistributing our resources and power. And finally, close gaps in climate vulnerability through direct participation of affected communities. And so, how was the framework created? Simply put, you know, a lot of the staff at the time were already knowledgeable about certain climate justice movements and values and principles already established for decades. And so we wanted to elevate those already established frameworks, such as the just transition framework cited most recently from the Climate Justice Alliance. You can find that in our framework as well. We also cited the spectrum of community engagement to ownership from the Movement Strategy Center. You can also find that in our framework as well. And we took a lot of notes and insights and collaboration with community-based organizations that I'll talk a little bit more about very soon. And we were sure to compensate them. And so that's basically how that came about. Okay, so just kind of talking a little bit about the collaboration process. And forgive me for the dog if you hear the dog barking in the background, but I'll keep us going. So we reached out to about 10 community-based organizations, first to review a memorandum of understanding, or basically like a contract, if you will, between our organization and other organizations. And the purpose of that effort was to kind of vet our materials, which will go on to be part of the grant agreement that we used with most community partners. And that's used to ensure that it embodies equitable and just principles and practices for our partnerships. We reached out over the course of 2 years to 10 community-based organizations. Their expertise ranged from food sovereignty to affordable housing, health, immigration, and cooperative developments, and everything in between. And rather than going to most groups with the clearest ties to the environment, some of them do, a lot of them do, we purposely sought out organizations that prioritize issues that come from unintended consequences of climate and environmental policies. So where there are gaps in our work, the broader work of climate justice and building efficiency and all of those things, we wanted to identify groups who are working with folks who fall between those cracks, those unintended consequences of the policies that go out. We couldn't hit all categories, right? So for instance, transportation isn't really represented anywhere in our framework. Nonetheless, we started where we saw solid connections to IMT's social priorities and principles. So I will briefly describe how we worked with them. Like I said, before we reached out, we discussed what groups we wanted to engage. They had to have a commitment to social and environmental issues and demonstrate a co-development or co-ownership model with their clients or community clients that they're working with. And we, sought our networks and selected groups that we were fairly comfortable with moving forward with. We sent formal invitations and conducted introduction meetings where we with each of them to review the ask that we were asking of them, and of course provided compensation for them. We allowed for about a month's time for each of these 10 groups you see here, their logos represented, to take a deep dive into our resources, our founding documents, our concepts of values, and just give their honest feedback. We weren't trying to waste their time or ours. We wanted to hear exactly if we were on the right track. Are we useful in certain areas? Are we not useful in certain areas? And basically, as community-based organizations, what would help them? What would benefit them from our work if we were ever to approach or work in their jurisdictions and cities? So we allowed them to review all of those things, and we were finally able to come up with a template or a model in order for them to share out. And I will move on to the next slide to Alexis, actually, for a poll at this point.
Thank you so much, Precious. So yes, we're going on to a poll because now that we've heard where IMT is at in this process of engaging community and policymaking and how we got there, we wanted to open it up to y'all um, to figure out where is your organization at in engaging community. So here's a poll on a scale of 1 to 5. Where are you in the community engagement process? 1 being, I don't know where to begin. 3 being, we are going to community for their input, and 5 being, we are equal partners with community and decision making. There's also an option for not applicable, just in case your organization doesn't work directly with community. So we are going to allow that poll to be up for 15-20 more seconds. And now let's look at the results. So it looks like we have a mix of answers. It looks like most of us are somewhere in the process of going to community for our input. Some of us don't know where to begin, which is fine. You are here in this webinar. That is a start. You're hearing our interpretation of a solution to include community, which doesn't mean it's the solution, but it's just what our organization is doing. So you are already doing your part. And some of us are already equal partners with community in decision making. So it's really important to know where we're at in this process. And also it's important to be in these spaces to talk about where we're at in relation to our peers so we could do some peer learning and get connected either offline or in the chat in this space. So thank y'all for putting your input. And now we are going to move on to Juliana to talk about our framework implementation and outcomes.
Thank you, Alexis. So as Precious noted, this was probably like a 2-year process in terms of relationship building with the CBOs, gathering their input and feedback. And at the end of those 2 years, we would have several one-on-ones. And at the end, we were able to collect all of their feedback, and those feedbacks appeared in certain themes. One of those themes was presenting information differently. The documents that we created were by and large very thorough, very informative, very much in the vein of a traditional policy document, which wasn't necessarily bad in and of itself, but a lot of our partners encouraged us to take these materials and create other resources from them to account for different learning styles. They also encouraged us to really try to incorporate the arts as much as possible. Apologies, y'all. I think we're having a little technical difficulties with our slides. Yeah, so they wanted us to really think about how not everybody has the time or the attention span to read through a 30-page document. So that's one of the feedbacks that we received. And they also encouraged us to really think about what a community-led process actually looks like. And for many of them, it was starting with CBOs and residents, as opposed to starting to work with cities and then working with CBOs. They wanted to have enough time to do popular education, outreach, general education around what the issues are in their buildings, so that whatever policy gets created solves those problems, as opposed to policy assuming what the problems are and attempting to solve these problems. They also encouraged us to focus on broader community-based solutions and not just policy. And that's something that's going to come up a lot because IMT is traditionally a policy type of organization. They really encouraged us to think about and acknowledge that although policy sometimes does solve issues and creates better conditions, sometimes it doesn't, right? And what we really want to focus on is a solution, not necessarily a policy. Another feedback we received is to really take stock of and lean on community strengths. Although frontline communities, BIPOC communities are yes, marginalized, yes, oppressed, they're also incredibly resilient, strong, wise, and very skilled. And they gently warned us not to come into this space with the savior mentality of like, how can we help you? Right? They were like, well, we can help each other. And a really beautiful quote that we received from one of our partners was that we aren't here saving anybody. We're saving each other, right? Because everybody has a role to play. Cities have a role to play. Technical organizations like IMT have a role to play. Residents and community-based organizations have a role to play. We all have a shared responsibility in solving the climate crisis. Something else they encouraged us to do when working in these places and spaces is to be mindful of the skills that they already have. So a lot of the CBOs that we partnered up with, they do research on the day-to-day. They phone bank, they door knock, they do focus groups. So instead of like consulting out these services to a private corporation or a private policy or policy research organization to work with the CBOs in your community that already have the relationships and the trust of the community that you're trying to learn more about, and empower them and resource them to do that work. And if there are other skills that maybe aren't fully there, people are trainable, people are eager to learn. So thinking of that as we work with different places. Another feedback we received was clarifying definitions. As Precious mentioned earlier, we use the term, combating the violence that's inherent in a technical process. And some of the CBOs were like, yeah, like we totally vibe with that. It is a violent process. And we had others that were like, well, hold on a second. We work day to day with people that are experiencing gun violence, domestic abuse, like very present and urgent forms of violence. So we wanted to be mindful of that, but also acknowledge that there is violence that occurs when people are left out of decision making and where resources are shared, right? People do lose their homes, people lose their lives. So there is a lot of violence that's inherent in this process. So we changed it to slow violence. They asked us to define what active listening means. They asked us to break down terms like market scan and power analysis. We were asked to include explicitly immigrant and undocumented communities in the term of frontline communities. And again, this is like a big one, to try and focus on using the term solution as opposed to policy. They identified some resource gaps where IMT could help. They wanted us to provide a list of the types of services that IMT provides to CBOs. They wanted to see more examples of energy efficiency models and buildings. They wanted us to share more out our successes, the impact that our work has had, and to share the learnings that we've accumulated along the way, and more materials, worksheets, visuals, tools that accessibly break down the very technical work that we do. What's missing? They noticed a few things that were missing from our materials. One of them was evaluation and accountability for CBOs. They noted themselves that even within their organizations and within themselves, there are biases. So they wanted us to think about that and also create equitable evaluation models, participatory evaluation models where we would all collectively get to decide how we all evaluate each other in the partnerships. This was a really interesting feedback that we got. IMT is a national organization. We are not membership based. We don't really necessarily as an organization have ties within communities. So we try to be very mindful of that and respectful of the relationships that CBOs hold within the members and tenants and community members that they organize. But a few of them noted that this kind of creates an unintentional hierarchical, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, a hierarchy and a very, not a horizontal relationship, a vertical relationship where the city is up here, IMTs here, CBOs are here, and community members, everyday working people that we're all a part of, are over here. And they mentioned that if we continue working with integrity and intentionality, that eventually we should try to find a way where we're all having this horizontal relationship along the ethos of everybody's equal. We all have a role to play. We all have a responsibility to solve this climate crisis, and we should all be able to communicate and work with each other as equals. They wanted us to create clearer, more transparent goals and roles. And almost every single one of them asked us if we had anything publicly written regarding how IMT handles conflict internally and with the other stakeholders and partners that we work with. Okay, so some of the positive feedback that we received after they reviewed our materials, because they were very long and they really took their time reading through everything and providing us a lot of very detailed and wonderful feedback. A lot of them said that they learned a lot along the way. I don't think any of the CBOs that we worked with were specializing in building decarbonization. So a few of them were like, wow, this is actually really interesting and I learned a lot. They also felt more inclined to want to interact and partner with IMT after they reviewed our resources. They really appreciated that in these resources, we detailed the history of the environmental justice movement, and we're very frank about IMT's role in it, and the fact that we haven't been doing this work most of the time, that this is very new to us, and we're, very humble in how we're approaching this, humble and honest. They also really appreciated our process guide, which was a material that we created to mainly help us internally apply our framework. So instead of leaving our colleagues out to figure out this stuff on their own, we created a material or a resource that can help them apply this framework into their work. And this was my favorite feedback out of all of them. They said that IMT's community engagement framework process, the taking 2 years of our time to identify CBOs, to build relationships with them, to check in with them, and to listen to their feedback, to include their feedback in the materials, to share that feedback, the final materials with them. That whole entire process, they said it was an outcome in and of itself. So we basically modeled, like the framework, we modeled it in the way that we created it. So that's obviously the way it's supposed to be, but it's very cool and rewarding when it ends up working out the way that it's supposed to work out. So yeah. All right, so outputs of the work. Obviously, we created the community engagement framework. We created the process guide to guide ourselves internally and other organizations like ours potentially. And then we created a brand new resource, which is the conflict resolution guide that a lot of them asked about. And that basically outlines how IMT will handle conflict internally with ourselves and our colleagues, with all our other stakeholders. And that's publicly available. So if y'all are interested in checking it out, that's on our website. And I think we're also going to share out these resources to everybody that signed up after the webinar. Okay, how have we implemented this? I think we kind of implicitly touched upon it throughout this presentation, but we wanted to present information differently. We've made several different, hopefully beautiful graphics that succinctly summarize what our framework is, right? You have our mission that's listed out clearly, our values, our goals. We also started working on a learning series, and there's like a little snippet of it to the right that Alexis has been leading, and that those are, graphics and very, I think, clear information about how buildings affect your wallet, how buildings affect the climate, why do buildings matter, how buildings affect your health. And we also have those materials translated in Spanish, and we're ready to also translate them into whatever other language our community-based partners would need them translated to. Our work in Florida. I think this is like the best example of how IMT has really implemented and lived this framework. So some background on me. Prior to joining IMT, I was the state director for a community-based organization called Poder Latinx in Orlando. And our work focused on environmental justice, climate justice, and immigrant justice. And we were one of the CBOs that was selected to work with IMT in the city of Orlando to explore this BPS policy. And I was really like won by IMT because like starting from like the MOUs, which the MOUs were vetted by CBO partners. You could tell that they had been written by people that were in the movement, that were in the space. In the way that IMT served as a third-party facilitator with cities, with Orlando, and like was very intentional about ensuring that we always felt like our experiences and our voices were just as important as anybody else's. The fact that when they were approached by the city, IMT said, well, thank you so much for approaching us. Have you started working with a CBO to, have them do community engagement around this? And they were like, oh, not yet. And IMT was like, okay, well, let's find some resources so that we can partner with someone and also give them the time, right? We were given about close to a year. I think it was around 7 months to do community engagement and create recommendations for the city of Orlando so that when they created their BPS policy, they would draft it or create it in a way that was actually solving the issues that people were expressing. Their homes were, the issues that they were experiencing in their buildings, so that policy was actually addressing those issues and not the other way around. We've continued to work there. Right now, the city is, holding those recommendations and trying to figure out how to develop their policy. But instead of just like saying, okay, peace out, let us know when you're doing this, we resourced one of our other community partners, Don Curtis, who was a representative of the NAACP, to act as a community expert, as a community advisor, to still organize and to just make sure that like people were still in contact with one another. And just a couple of months ago, we were able to resource another CBO, Central Florida Jobs for Justice, to work with Dawn to craft a campaign around the things that people said they needed done when we did the community engagement, so that it's not just left up to the city of Orlando to figure out how to implement these things, because obviously I think there's a lot of city folks on the call. As well-intentioned as people are, sometimes there's like bureaucracies and change in leadership, and a lot of things happen where there isn't a political will to get it done. So we wanted to make sure that community could still get its work done despite what happens on the side of the city. A last little tidbit, community accountability boards are something that we are exploring and that some of our community partners have implemented in different cities. And I think that it has a potential to be like a really cool model, because in essence, it's a formation that's comprised of like local leaders and activists, like community accountable individuals, and they're resourced to be on those boards. But we also want to make sure that we're learning from these models and vetting them, right? Because maybe that can work really well in a city like Boston, but maybe it won't work in a city like Santa Ana. So we're trying to bring together our community partners and jurisdictions to create a peer learning program to improve these models, and also share out our learnings with everybody in our broader community. And I think that wraps it up in our section. Thank you all so much. I'll pass it over to Alexis now.
Yes, thank you so much, Juliana, for going through that long process of us implementing our framework. Our framework was an example of, community-led solutions, and then going to what our current work is in implementation. So now we're going to go to audience questions. So as I said in the beginning, if you have any questions, there's a little button on the bottom panel that says Q&A. You could write your question there. We already have a couple. So as you're writing your questions, I'm going to read through the ones we have, and then Precious or Juliana will answer those questions right now. So we have one question here that says, local government employee, how should we value folks' feedback who lack knowledge on the topic? Is everyone's voice weighed equally? So who would like to take this question? Precious, yes.
Yes, I would. Thank you, Alexis, and thank you, government employee, whoever you are, for asking that question. That's a really good one. And frankly, one that IMT has discussed and continues to mull over internally as we roll out things like community engagement plans and other resources. First, I would say a community's lived experience and expertise are valuable for real solutions. So if we're in the business of producing real solutions, communities' lived experience and expertise are a part of that. They can offer insights, that strengthen proposed solutions because they are closest to the problem that we're all trying to help solve. So I would venture out to say, yes, communities' voices are weighed equally with everyone's voice. Those of us who have more information, in part, this is why this framework and some of our goals are laid out this way. We want to make those things transparent as possible, as much as we can to help folks understand processes and all that's involved in going from point A to point B to L M N O P all the way down to Z. So yes, to be clear, everyone has something to bring to the table like we've been talking about today. Expert knowledge has its rightful place, but it's the community that has the lived experience. And the point is that community should not be an afterthought, but top of mind in this process. So with communities' lived experience and expertise, in order to bring about real solutions, they have to be a part of that process all the time.
And can I add a little bit to that?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, especially when you're a professional that's in this space where you're thinking about this 24/7, when you've gone to school around how to, develop codes and, how to pass policy and all of these things, it can be easy to hear someone in a meeting just like vent their frustrations on you because, their buildings are still not energy efficient because they can't pay their bills, and in your mind you're like, well, we're doing all this work. That is frustrating, but my advice is to try to really not to take that so personally and to realize that like we're all doing this work to try and solve those problems, right? To try to make sure that people's energy bills aren't unaffordable, that people have healthy buildings, that we have a safe and happy home. And at the end of the day, like, we're trying to solve those problems that they're voicing. We might not like the tone that it's coming in, and that's why we have to be mindful to like not tone police, but to try to like center yourself in that way in this work.
Thank you both. So the next question, either of y'all could take this, is I love the idea of solutions rather than policies. Can you give a specific example of what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm racking my brain right now, but a big one for, at least in Orlando, when we were doing our community engagement, was one, energy bills. A lot of people it was just unaffordable for working professionals. We think that $100 or $200, okay, it sucks to pay that much, but for a lot of folks that are living paycheck to paycheck, that can offset their entire yearly budget. Also, just like housing affordability. It's very unaffordable to live in many different places throughout this country and maybe even globally. So those are the problems. In terms of solutions, there are other cities that are like providing solutions. And I'll say right now I'm based in Los Angeles, and it's not perfect, but the main municipal utility here last year, because of the work of incredible organizing and campaigns, I can't remember their names right now, so please forgive me. They were able to pressure the city council and the municipal utility to prevent power and water cutoffs from people that can't afford their bills. So that's possible. We could do things like that, especially in a municipal utility context.
Okay, so the next question is, can the framework in your materials be used without engaging formally with your organization?
I believe so. Yes. They're public. You don't have to enter your information in order to download anything. But the invitation is open if you have a question or want to understand a little bit more about how we came to certain conclusions or how does one thing or the other play out, feel free to engage us. We'd love to chat about that individually if that's more comfortable for you. But yeah, they're available to you. You don't have to be under a huge contract or anything in order to reach out to myself or Juliana or Alexis or anyone on our team. We're more than happy to learn from each other. So there's that.
And this question is more about IMT and how we're constantly changing. And this question is, I'd love to hear more about what this looks like in terms of IMT's policy/solution choices. Will IMT change their goals to meet local community preferences if they are different from IMT goals?
That's a good question. I can start by saying, we're a growing organization, and I'm so happy to say that. The history that I ran through, the journey that we talked about earlier this hour, I really do credit our leadership and board for creating space for colleagues and employees of IMT to think deeply about these things and advocate for certain things. We're currently going through or redoing our strategic process, and where we're reevaluating a lot of our goals and ambitions over the next few years and finding alignment so that we are current with the times and with the needs of people, but also, holding to our foundational commitments. And so depends on what you mean by goals, what type of goals, but I can say we're constantly realigning and rethinking about our mission and who it benefits. And so we are open to that process, particularly with frontline communities and in the cities in which they're based. So probably a very Washington, D.C. answer based in D.C., but there that is.
So this next question is specifically on BPS, which is building performance standards, which is, again, another type of solution for building decarb. And this question says, what are some ways that community perspective is shaping building performance standards? Can you point to any policies that reflect this differently from BPS in other places, from an employee at government-sponsored enterprise?
I don't know. Juliana, can I put you on the spot for that? Just to kind of dig in a little bit more in Orlando, what that process is like.
Yeah, I was reading that question and I was trying to understand what they meant. Like, did you mean how is community engagement changing the way that traditional BPS policy is looking like? And if so, I'm just going to run with that. The way that community engagement is changing that is that in traditional building performance standard policies, you're thinking about things like in a vacuum, like, the energy efficiency of the place and like indoor air quality. And it's, in my opinion, it's very like health focused, which is like, great, we all want to live in a healthy building, but if you're not able to, pay your bills, if you're not able to afford your rent, you don't really care. You're too focused on like survival. And I think the way that community engagement is changing that is that it's forcing and challenging cities to step outside of their comfort zone and, don't think about a building performance standard without thinking about tenant protections. Don't think about a building performance standard without thinking about housing affordability. Don't think about a BPS standard without thinking about energy bills and where your energy is coming from. That's another big one. A lot of our CBOs are like pressuring the utilities to shut down their coal power plants, to provide a plan of how they're going to be transitioning out of fossil fuels, to call them out in their sneaky things like wanting to put carbon offsets in their metrics and saying, no, you can't do that. So it's much more holistic, and it makes people a little bit more uncomfortable, but we don't have the right to comfort. We don't have the right to comfort. We're in a place and in a space where in order to really fix what's been happening, we have to think very differently and revolutionize our government, our energy sectors, the way we live, eat, consume, everything. So that's my soapbox.
I also wanted to piggyback off of that, what Juliana just said, and highlight the city of Portland also for their climate and health standards for existing buildings. Their Build Shift community collaborative, along with the city of Portland, has been leading in this. They were actually approached with the traditional BPS model at first, but actually took it back to community and designed HART standards, talking about, heating, energy, resilience, temperature, following that acronym. I missed some of them, but I just want to highlight and shout the city of Portland and the Build Shift group there, that they've been doing this work actually for several years. And that's just one example of the community's perspective being brought to the table, being brought in the conversation along with cities and jurisdictions, thinking about renters and the apartment buildings and safe housing and all of those things. So shout out to Build Shift in Portland, Oregon.
Okay, and I think we're going to take our last question, which is a good question to end us out with because it's very generic and it applies to all of us working in this climate justice field. And the question is, how do we balance the speed of climate change solutions needed with how long a true engagement process can take?
I have a lot. Oh, first, I don't know if you want to take a stab. I have a lot to say about this, but it's like in a convoluted knot in my brain, because to me, it sounds like we have this climate crisis. There's like genuine urgency around reducing emissions and doing all these things that we need to do. And then there's like the fact that we need to move at the speed of trust and that this process takes time. So in my personal opinion, that urgency is always going to be there, regardless of us doing this engagement process, whether we decide to do it very, very quickly or to take our time, that urgency is always going to be there. And when you move slow, there was a saying that somebody dropped a while back and I forgot. It was like, if you move slow, you move smooth. If you move smooth, you move fast. We're better off like taking our time with this process, because another aspect of this is like when you do deep and real community engagement, you start to create like deep democracy, and you start to kind of find like the nuggets and the pearls within community. That's when you really get into the good stuff, because people really do have the answers to their problems. They know how to solve these problems. The problem is that they don't have the resources. Governments aren't resourcing their solutions. So I'm of the opinion that we should always take our time and that it ends up being better off in the long term.
And with that, I think we're gonna close out our presentation. I realized there was a couple questions unanswered, so here is our email information. But thank you everybody to coming to this webinar, and I hope y'all have a good rest of your day.